heard you call me, Aunt Lucy.
Yes, dear.
We're gonna get you.
In this series, we've delved into a range of cinematic genres, from the rom-com to the heist movie, unpacking what makes them tick and why they continue to draw directors and audiences alike. For our final show, we turn to the genre that has always been closest to my heart, horror. In the next hour, I'll examine some of the key conventions and techniques used devilishly well by directors over the years to exploit our deepest, darkest, and most elemental fears. No other kind of film deploys images and sound to such powerful, primal effect as the horror movie, and horror is as strong today as it's ever been. Take Jordan Peele's brilliant Get Out, which delves deep into the broiling undercurrents of so-called post-racial America.
Get out.
Sorry, man.
Okay. Get out!
Yo!
Yeah!
Yo, chill, man.
Get out!
Chill! Chill, man! Chill!
Get the fuck out of here!
Like so many great horror movies, Get Out struck a nerve because it tapped into contemporary anxieties, lending fantastical form to fears which had perhaps been suppressed, turning them from a whisper to a scream. Peele uses the horror narrative to look beneath the beatific smile of 21st century liberalism, finding the grinning skull of exploitation and entrapment, all unveiled during a roller coaster ride into a very American nightmare.
How do you feel now?
I can't move.
You can't move.
Why can't I move?
You're paralyzed. Now, sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
A commercial hit, the film was also nominated for several Oscars, including Best Picture, with Peele becoming the first African-American to win the award for Best Original Screenplay. As is so often the case, horror is a genre of firsts. I first fell in love with horror films as a child, watching Hammer movies on late-night TV with the sound turned down so my parents couldn't hear. As a teenager, I saw films like Shivers, The Exorcist, and Dawn of the Dead in my local cinemas. At college, I wrote my thesis on horror fiction and came across an essay by H.P. Lovecraft who said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." Now, all this made perfect sense to me, since I've always loved the experience of being terrified by films. But what is a horror movie? Is it an essential rites of passage for generations of filmgoers to prove their nerves of steel? A contemporary evolution of the great Gothic tradition in literature? A reprehensible exploitative spectacle cashing in on the most depraved instincts of humanity for quick profit? Or the most challenging and creative field of movie making, where the lowliest auteur with a scary idea can have a breakout hit, while the best-backed big studio production is not guaranteed a box office return. The truth is that horror movies are all of the above, and they will always thrive.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
In many ways, horror is a genre defined not by its subject matter, but by its style. If you watch a clip from a horror film, even if it's a scene without violent action or a rampaging monster, you know what you're seeing because of the way the films are shot, lit, art directed, acted, edited, and scored. A horror film is a horror film because of the way it makes us feel. And according to Stephen King, those feelings can range from being terrified to being horrified to being just grossed out. Either way, it's not the subject matter that makes a horror film, it's the treatment of the subject and our reaction to it. Michael Mann's Manhunter, based on Thomas Harris's novel Red Dragon, and Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs, based on Harris's sequel novel, tell very similar stories and even share some characters.
Did you get my card?
I got it, thank you.
But these are two very different types of film. Let's look at the scenes in which the investigative heroes are granted interviews with the serial killer Hannibal Lecter. In Manhunter, the cell is painted white, strip-lit, an everyday institution, and the antagonists play a psychological game while understating. This version of Lecter, played by Brian Cox, feigns concern but is palpably a creep, locked up for good reason.
And you think you're smarter than me since you caught me?
No. I know that I'm not smarter than you.
Then how did you catch me?
You had disadvantages.
What disadvantages?
You're insane.
In The Silence of the Lambs, Lecter is incarcerated in what might as well be the dungeon of Castle Dracula. Stone walls, scary lighting, and unsettled heroine. And for the final flourish, Hopkins famously does a weird nasal slobber he says he copied from Bela Lugosi. As scripted, the scenes could be in the same movie, but it's very clear that Manhunter has been directed as a high-tech psycho-thriller,
Would you like to leave me your home phone number?
while Silence of the Lambs is a suspense horror film. We'll explore more of the cinematic techniques directors have in their arsenal later, but for now we must take the first step into the key conventions and characters you'll see in most horror films.
In the Harris Street property.
In order for a horror film to work, we have to believe in it. And one way of doing this is to evoke a world which is recognisable or sympathetic before the weird, nasty, uncanny stuff starts. Think of the opening scenes from Psycho, which don't seem to be from a horror film at all, but something altogether more mundane.
Any calls? Teddy called me. My mother called to see if Teddy called. Oh, your sister called to say she's going to Tucson to do some buying and she'll be gone the whole weekend.
One of the key tropes of horror movies is a juxtaposition of two worlds, the old and the new, light and dark, good and bad, and a journey from one to the other. We usually start in the familiar world, the world in which we can easily believe.
Give me that again. How do you spell that? Safety, yeah. Okay. What is it, foreign?
Then the monster, the threat, the menace, the terror, must come from beyond, either from an older world unnaturally preserved, or from the depths of a broken mind, or from beyond a veil separating this world from another dimension. So, for example, Angel Heart begins in the schlubby, familiar metropolitan world of New York. But Harry Angel's journey takes him to exotic New Orleans, where voodoo rituals and magic incantations and potions lurk at every corner. Intriguingly, in William Hjortsberg's Chandler-esque source novel Falling Angel, the action stays in New York. It was writer-director Alan Parker who decided to add the Deep South locations, creating a geographical journey from one world to the next, altogether more cinematic than the novel. A huge number of horror films feature just such a journey. The unsuspecting occupants of a coach trundling to Castle Dracula.
Hi, driver!
Marion's fateful journey to the Bates Motel. Sergeant Howie arriving on the remote island of Summerisle in The Wicker Man. The Torrance family driving to the Overlook Hotel in The Shining.
You mean nobody's seen this place yet?
Or the bumbling, naive teenagers of so many a gore film.
No.
Actually, it might be kind of nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes the journey can be reversed, with the threat travelling from the dark place, coming to meet us. But remember, just as Reagan in The Exorcist seems to unlock the key to another world by playing with a Ouija board, so the monster usually has to be invited into your home or your community. That vampire can't get into your bedroom unless somehow you ask them in. Either way, we're transported from a safe world, one with which we're familiar, to another realm that's both unsettling and unnerving. And along the way, we'll be given signals that something wicked this way comes.
Hello, Danny.
The ill-fated journey that brings us into contact with the monster is traditionally littered with warning signs that tell us clearly that something's just not right. Now, these prophecies of doom are often delivered by a wise peasant character who's more in the know than the sophisticated city slicker or dismissive local townsfolk. Here's Crazy Ralph in Friday the 13th doing his best to warn the newly arrived camp staff.
I'm the messenger of God. You're doomed if you stay here. This place is cursed. Cursed.
This is a type who goes back beyond horror cinema and can be found in Shakespeare and classic tragedy. They're both comic relief and a signpost of what's up ahead in the Twilight Zone.
Oh, no. 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 No, 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 no. I'll do something.
Good luck, Mary. Stop by and see us the next time you're in.
Thank you, but I'm never coming back.
But beyond such warnings, horror requires a slow build-up of dread, with the style of the filmmaking itself telling us that something is amiss. Whether it's the performances, the lighting, or the soundtrack, which hints at madness. In the 1962 cult classic Carnival of Souls, we're made aware on a number of occasions that the world of the heroine is out of sorts following a car accident. Everything about the film screams, this is not right. So when we get to the final horrifying payoff, we don't feel like we've been cheated or tricked. Rather, we've been mesmerised. This is the artier end of horror, owing much to the silent German school of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, where every single thing in the frame is distorted and weird for maximum cumulative disturbance. Compare the visual style of Dr. Caligari with this short film, Monster, by Jennifer Kent, which laid the groundwork for her brilliant debut feature, The Babadook. The setting is mundane, a domestic home where a noisy kid is driving his mother insane. The film is full of shadowy, low angles, as if the characters are being watched by a lurking, malevolent force. Monster is like a potted history of horror. This shot, as the mother reaches out to the doorknob in her bedroom, terrified of what's on the other side, could have come straight out of The Haunting.
Is the door locked?
Now look at this opening from Dario Argento's Suspiria. In this apparently innocuous sequence, a woman leaves an airport and takes a taxi in the rain. In the script, it's a nothing sequence, but Argento films it as if it were a horror set piece, with creepy lighting and score and sound effects which set the audience on edge. Note the operatic synthesis of every single element, just to be terrifying. So by the time the taxi arrives at its destination, we know that something very bad awaits.
If you are thinking of going into this house, don't.
Horror movies are full of people going into places they really shouldn't, and this superb spoof trailer by Shaun of the Dead director Edgar Wright demonstrates just how familiar we are with this convention.
Don't.
Is anybody home? Hello?
But if people didn't go into the scary place, horror movies would be a lot less frightening and a lot shorter. And the fact is that from our childhood, we're inexorably drawn to dangerous environments. That's one of the reasons we watch horror movies.
Hello?
I am the spirit of dark and lonely water, ready to trap the unwary, the show-off, the fool. And this is the
Take a look at this public information film from the early 70s. The film was designed to teach kids to stay away from dangerous waters, waters in which they could be trapped and drowned.
This branch is weak, rotten. It'll never take his way.
The film is meant to be educational, but it's shot like a horror movie. Why? Well, because we all basically understand the rules of horror movies. We understand that in these stories, people do things they shouldn't do. They go places they shouldn't go, with terrifying results. Like Jaws, if you saw Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water as a child, you could be forgiven if you never swam anywhere ever again.
Sensible.
Oi, mate, that's a stupid place to swim.
The best horrors seem to imitate the fragile, visceral quality of our worst nightmares, some of which were spawned in childhood, transcending reality and making us feel like no other genre does. And The Scary Place plays into that fear brilliantly. In the opening paragraphs of The Haunting of Hill House, author Shirley Jackson beautifully laid out the blueprint of that horror archetype. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality, she wrote. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against the hills, holding darkness within.
An evil old house, the kind some people call haunted, is like an undiscovered country waiting to be explored. Hill House had stood for 90 years and might stand for 90 more. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone.
In the Robert Wise film, the house has a gothic quality echoed by Stanley Kubrick in the exteriors of the Overlook Hotel. But what's important is how the lighting and camera angles add a cracked dimension to these scenes. Notice how the cinematography brings a touch of chaos to the orderly interiors of this house. And note how, in this sequence, mirrors and lenses are used to bend the world slightly, suggesting that the house is somehow changing along with our heroine's deteriorating mental state. Wise and his cinematographer Dennis Bolton use shadows and tilting angles to imprison the characters within this not-sane building. Just as the cameras lurking through the corridors imply the presence of otherworldly spirits, so the house itself seems to come to life, engulfing our heroine in her worst nightmares.
The house is coming down around me.
Well, it's very, homey.
Yeah.
This is a recurrent feature of horror cinema, locations in which evil itself seems to seep from the walls, the cellars, the attic. The location can be utterly mundane. Think of the house on Prospect Street from The Exorcist. There's nothing about it that tells us to stay away. Or is there? Look at this sequence in which Ellen Burstyn's Chris ventures into the attic in search of rats. She has a candle, as if she's stepped back into the past, into an old Gothic castle. Director William Friedkin makes brilliant use of silence here. There's no music, just some unsettling ambient noises. It's as if the house is taking Chris to another world, a world of darkness.
Smells nice.
Oh, Carl. Jesus Christ, Carl, don't do that.
Most horror films would be vastly diminished without their troubling score, creepy hints of looming danger, or at times ominous silences. The picture dominates our impression, but the sound is where much of the effect is achieved. When David Lynch made Eraserhead, he attributed a huge part of its success to the weird industrial soundscapes conjured up by Alan Splett. Lynch would continue to work with Splett until his death in 1994, and indeed after it. When I visited David Lynch's sound studio in LA, he showed me that buried in the floor beneath the console on which he mixes all his movies, he kept a small portion of Alan Splett's ashes. It meant that when Lynch sat at the desk, he could feel Splett's spirit or aura guiding him through the sound mix.
Simon? Simon?
Take Oriel Tarago. Does that name ring a bell? Well, maybe not, but if you like horror films, the chances are you've encountered Tarago's brilliant work conjuring up the sound of terror.
Simon?
I first noticed Oriel Tarago's name in the credits of The Devil's Backbone, on which he served as sound editor. But it was while watching The Orphanage, on which Tarago was sound designer, that I really started to be aware of his work. Describing the house in which the ghostly action unfolds as one more character in the movie, Tarago went out of his way to make it sound right. He travelled to a remote house in the mountains where he recorded natural sounds from both inside and outside, steps from different floors, bangs on wooden beams, the creaks of an old staircase. For the séance scenes, he gathered the children of friends and relatives and spent days playing scary games with them just to capture the right screams. For the sound of Thomas's breathing, Tarago wanted two textures, a high-pitched choking sound and a low, threatening animal tone. He remembered that screenwriter Sergio G. Sanchez had told him that he suffered from asthma as a child. So Tarago took him into a studio and recorded his breathing, which he then mixed with strange sounds he made himself by holding water in his mouth and gasping.
Simón, hijo.
Perhaps more than in any other genre, sound design is crucial to horror. One of the great joys of horror movies is the therapeutic release of tension and anxiety. Wes Craven once told me, horror movies don't create fear, they release fear.
Can't I get any sleep? What the hell do you want?
I'm very sorry.
And one of the ways they do this is through the jump scare, the gradual accumulation of tension which leads up to a moment of fright and hopefully the release of a really good scream. We can find a classic example of the jump scare in this sequence from Jacques Tourneur's 1942 movie Cat People. A woman walks through a park pursued by another who might turn into a werepanther. Nothing is really happening except the stalking, but the rhythm of the footsteps, the anxious performance of the possible victim, all build an almost unbearable tension. Note how precise is the choreography of the camera work, the pacing, and in particular the editing. We're primed for something terrible to happen. Instead, a bus appears in the frame and its doors open with a loud cat-like hiss.
Climb on, sister. Are you riding with me or ain't you?
This sequence became so iconic that the bus became industry parlance for any moment in which the audience is made to hold its breath and then to jump, often at something utterly innocuous. Now look at this sequence from Exorcist 3, which, for my money, contains one of the greatest jump scares of modern cinema. The scene is set in a hospital where a nurse on duty hears strange noises. She's already disturbed someone sleeping, giving us a scare. Now she's trying to put her fears out of her mind, but the audience is on the edge of their seats.